Further. 5. Shopping. So what do you think of this dress, Belle? I was in a stiff wooden chair in a holding cell outside the mall's dressing rooms, trapped on all sides by stretched satin. I was surprised by how quickly the other girls had broken down, offering their bodies as host to the parasitic enemy, dress clothes. I soberly realized that combat was inevitable. I would do what was necessary to protect my species. It's very flattering, Lucy, I said cautiously, not wanting to reveal how much I knew. What about this? Asked Angelica. It brings out the gray in your human brain, I said as naturally as I would if she had one. Angelica knitted her brow and gave me a wary look. Her parasite was on to me. I had to act fast. Angelica, can I ask you a very personal question because I trust you as a friend? Sure. I tried to think of something friends ask each other. Do you ever worry that your white blood cell count is lower than your other friends? I mean, yes, your immune system is fine, but is it the best? She fiddled with her belt. My tactic was working. I decided to hit her with another bonding question, forcing the parasite out with the power of human discourse. Isn't it weird how girls are 50 times more attracted to men with razor-sharp canines than soft, cuddly ones? I mean, how is that evolutionarily beneficial? I guess because men with sharp teeth are more competent around chewy foods. Does Edward have sharp teeth? Angelica asked. The girls giggled. What in the who? Who said Edward? Evolutionarily, that's what I said. Evolutionarily beneficial. Not Edward beneficial. Geez. What, do you have a crush on him or something? Do you think he's cute? I don't. Not cute. But nice. He's a really nice guy. He is not a really nice guy. I shouted loyally. He is a very dangerous man. The girls exchanged glances. Lucy exchanged an ominous glance for Laura's knowing glance, and Laura traded that glance for Angelica's loaded one. Well, he is strangely quiet, admitted Laura, astutely noting how peculiar it was for a non-vampire to be soft-spoken. It's strange when people don't shout out whatever words and half-formed ideas are incubating in their heads. Gives me the willies. I agree, said Lucy. I heard that at his old elementary school, the bigger guys used to gang up on Edward, day after day. One day Edward decided enough was enough and bam. The bigger guys hit him even harder. After that Edward went through a biting phase for a while because, he can't exactly hit back. She squeezed her skinny bicep as she said this, implying that Edward couldn't hit back because a single blow from him would be fatal. Of course, she added, that story is probably just urban legend. Yes, I agreed. It's just urban history. Yet I couldn't help but remember Angelica's warning while her mouth muscles were spasming out of any conscious control, beware the crown. Crown as in dental crown? As in, Edward was going to go on a vampire biting spree once the dentist had fixed a few cosmetic problems? I would have to enter this into my reasons why dating Edward is an extreme sport and thus a legal alternative to Jim Rubrick. So, which store are we shopping at next? I asked as we walked out into the mall. I had noticed a kitchenware store on the way. Would that have a cookbook for vampires? It was funny, all this worrying about whether Edward was a vampire, and I didn't even know what vampires ate. Whichever one carries prom dresses, Lucy said. I stopped in my tracks. Whoa, well hold on, I said, digging my heels into the sidewalk to resist forward movement like Scooby-Doo, only no one was pulling me so it was more like I was walking on my heels. There aren't any books in dress stores. We're shopping for more clothes, said Angelica, as casually as you'd say good morning to a neighbor in the olden days. I can't shop for more clothes, guys. I'm a role model to 1.3 million girls, I have to prove to them that there's more to life than clothes. There are novels out there. Romance novels for every type of monster fetish. Fine, said Lucy. Let's split up. The three of us will continue shopping in the brightly lit, well-populated mall. Belle, you roam around alone, looking for something to read in the dimly lit alleys. Great plan. I'll see you sometime later, I said. Okay. Meet us somewhere nearby at a later time. I searched and searched the streets for reading material to no avail. Even the grocery store, which usually carries a few well-written wine labels, failed me. They were all in pictograms. I was about to give up when I saw a shiny race car covered in antennae. Something about this car induced a strong feeling in me. I was seized with an urge to tow it. Nothing irks me more than a car parked in a loading zone. I wrote down the license before entering the computer games and price elasticity for Storm Chaser's store to my right. Someone was going to feel the cold hand of justice today. May I help you? A wretched old man with stink breath was nosing his garbled moldy nose into my face. I felt bad for him. It was too late for his life to bear an impact on me. Belle Goose, Red Cross, certified babysitter. Do you by chance have any vampire simulation games? I wanted to see the world through Edward's eyes. Scrap that, do you have any Edward Mullen simulation games? Well, I don't know about the latter, but we've got plenty of the first. We've got your coffin sleeping vampire simulation, your crucifix fearing vampire simulation, your human blood drinking vampire simulation, your above average looks, but otherwise completely normal vampire simulation. Ooh. That one. That's the one. Okie dokie. Just have a seat in the booth and I'll help you out with the 3D goggles. I assume these goggles also prevent the vampire spirit from escaping once you switch out your human one, I said, putting the goggles on and tying them tight. These goggles make all the green things have red shadows. Right. And the fine print is that they turn you into a vampire. If that's the character you choose, yes. But permit me to suggest choosing Yoshi, a formidable underdog among an otherwise completely armed and loaded cast. Yeah, sure, will do, I said, giving my vampire character a missile launcher. Immediately after the simulation began, I felt my skin blanching and my hair growing beautiful. I felt my teeth sharpening and my blood going dead. I had this insatiable urge all of a sudden. An insatiable urge for magnesium. No, that wasn't it. I wanted blood. I ripped open the booth's curtain, my own strength surprising me as the material swung effortlessly to the side. I was free, and not even my morals could stop me. You. I said menacingly, turning on the old man. I didn't have anything against him personally, but I couldn't control myself. Being a vampire was difficult. I was filled with newfound awe for Edward, that he could walk through the hall every day without lunging at the nearest person's wrist and clinging to it with his teeth, as I was doing now. The senior was old, but he was strong. He flicked me off in one fell wrist circle, tearing off the goggles with 5 slower but persistent gestures. As the vampire spirit escaped, I quickly came to my senses. What? AAA? I shook the dizzies out of my head and wiped my saliva off his wrist. That is one crazy machine, old man, I informed him. I hope you have a license for that. I gathered up my things and walked out without taking the game controller I had bought. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The sun had set now and the streets were eerily quiet except for the spooky ho-ha noise I made to scare away zombies, enemies of spooks. I had to counteract this with zombie noises to scare away any spooks I might have attracted. As I wandered aimlessly through the pitch-black alleys, I had a funny feeling I was being watched. I heard rustling and the distinct sound of a Sega game controller waving through the air. I turned around. It was the old man, senilely whirling his merchandise. My heart began to pound, beating against my chest, pummeling my ribs and getting all braggy about its muscle strength. I was being followed. Quick, I told myself. Try to remember what you learned from Jimbo's self-defense for young ladies. Jimbo was a beefy man with prison tats. Go into the nearest dark alley, I recalled Jimbo saying. Freeze like a rabbit or the creature you desire your attacker to mistake you for. If your attacker shouts out to you, respond politely, maybe your optimism will change his mind. If you're about to get in an elevator with a man you feel uncomfortable spending time with in a small, escapeless room, head right in. Remember, fear is an irrational emotion you should probably ignore. Armed with these tips, I hung a right into the nearest dead end, curled up into a ball and started rolling. Where are you luring me? The old man taunted. Please stand up and take your game controller, I can't bend down that far. Just then I heard a familiar whirring. I looked up. Edward's body was plummeting from the roof of the nearest building. I stood up to try to save him, but he deftly aimed his body at the man, bringing him to the ground. The old man moaned and then settled himself for a little nap on the ground, using the crux of his arm as a pillow. Old people like being given an excuse to sleep. Please come with me to my car, Belle, he offered gently, limping towards me. I mean, only if you want to. Not with that attitude. Pretty please? I shook my head disappointedly. What's the magic verb form? Belle, he groaned. We don't have time for this. Plus, I hate when you make me do this. Imperative, Edward. The magic verb form is imperative. You don't have to hide your natural inclination to boss me around. I want you to feel comfortable with me, Edward. To the point of domination. Okay. He took a deep breath and pointed at me. You, he said stiffly, the words flowing straight from some primordial, bossy word bank. Come to the place where you want to go, which, hopefully, is my car, where I will be, God willing. All right. He relaxed. You're not angry at me for being domineering? That wasn't a trick? No, Edward, I said, leading him to his car. Get in. He hopped in as I started the engine for him, looking at me softly, murderously softly. Are you okay? He asked. Yeah, why wouldn't I be okay? Are you serious, Belle? Were you not aware of what that sick old man was trying to do? He shook his head, seething. You're lucky I was on that roof all day. That old man, he was trying to sell you a Sega product. What were you doing waiting for me on a roof all day? I asked, watching his knuckles whiten at his own reference to Sega. How could you possibly predict that he would lure me there on top of telepathically knowing his intentions? I had him there, vampires only get one super talent. I was watching the sky on that roof, he said quietly. Examining Mercury through my telescope. The things I saw and heard, Belle, it's so difficult for me to explain. Try, Edward. The only way this will work is if we're honest with one another. Honest about Mercury. It was spinning. A lot planets are out there, Belle. Spinning and spinning. We were quiet for a moment. Promise me you'll never walk out in these streets alone again, Belle. His face contorted in fitful rage. Suddenly, he rolled down his window and shouted, She plays Nintendo. He inhaled deeply. Play Nintendo, he breathed out. I won't always be here to keep you safe from Sega. I tried not to breathe too loud so I wouldn't disrupt his protective ire. It was beautiful. Are you hungry? He finally asked. I know we're just friends, but we could both be friends eating dinner together if that appeals to you. Or we could eat at separate tables and still be friends. Or eat at separate tables but be going out. I mean. He glanced at me. You probably already know this because you're a really smart girl. Are you offering to take me to dinner? He nodded slowly. Suddenly, my eyes started blazing and firing up. Nothing makes me angrier than when people do nice things for me. Listen, I said, grabbing him by the collar, I'm the nice one. You're the one with uncontrollable aggression. Understand? Oh God, he said, blood gushing from his nose. Now you've done it, Belle, now you've really done it. Direct phrasing gives me nosebleeds. That's better, I said, releasing his collar. Get nice and angry. Can you please hold my nose for me? I don't want to take my hands off the steering wheel. Sure. I plugged his nose. Little vampire punk, I added beneath my breath, before I lost the adrenaline. Whoa. Look at that palace. Edward pulled alongside the curb. We were parking next to what I can only describe as a modern-day pantheon. Buca di Beppo read the fancy script and neon lights. Isn't it great? Edward asked, touching my shoulder and then taking it away and then firmly placing it back when I directed him to. To think Italy is full of these bistros. I was awestruck and flattered that Edward would want to introduce me to his cultured lifestyle. And yet a tiny part of my heart, maybe the pulmonary valve, sank. Were we really as good a match as I told myself repeatedly in the mirror we were? He was more worldly and more otherworldly than I. What world could I bring to our relationship? The underworld, I thought, resolutely ripping in half my get into heaven free coupon. Looking back, I probably could have come up with a better world if I'd given it another moment of thought. SeaWorld comes to mind. Edward led me to a small, intimate table by the bar television. Interestingly, the waitress was very quick to interrupt our private tête-à-tête on whether the blue team was evil or good with her own irrelevant commentary on specials. And was it just me, or was her back completely turned to me as Edward spoke? Maybe I was being territorial, but it seemed that she was standing on the table for the express purpose of snubbing me and filling her entire purview with Edward. I'll have a lasagna, buca small, I told her muscled calves. Make that a buca large, Edward said. Are you sure? Asked the waitress. A buca small feeds 7 to 9 people. We do things family style here. Screw sustainable population growth family style. I'm sure, he said, smoothly winking at me through her legs. She crossed her legs. We couldn't really see each other after that. Once she left, Edward turned his dazzling, disco ball eyes to me. Just looking at him transported me elsewhere, to a rave. A rave with pulsing, multicolored eye-shaped lights. I wouldn't normally order for you, he said, but with everything that's happened in the last hour, also confusing and fast-paced and condensed for comedic purposes, I'll bet you're pretty hungry. How could you tell? It's like you can read my expression. He frowned and looked down at the tablecloth. Actually, you're the one person I can't read. I've always considered myself good at looking at people's expressions and making wild guesses as to how they feel, but I look at your face and try to guess what you are thinking, and all I hear is beep. Just this giant beeping sound, the sound a medical monitor makes when you die and everything goes blank. Beep. Like that. Ah, the old beep, a sound I had grown accustomed to. A default sound, if you will, that my mind returns to whenever it has nothing more interesting to think about. I know what you mean, I said. There's that sound again, he said. What did you say? Because to me it just sounded like beep 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 beep. The waitress carted my lasagna platter over. Are you sure you don't want anything? She asked Edward, typically. Actually, do you make blood sausage? Yep. Great. One order of that, Ben. Easy on the sausage, though. Easy on the sausage? Yeah, I'm more of a sauce guy. A blood sauce guy? Yeah, a blood sauce guy. He turned to me. You were saying? BEP, I thought as I grasped wildly for something else to say. Then I had another one of my well-researched epiphanies. His constant use of puerile, his love of video games, his lack of friends, planet gazing, and flail run. You're a zombie, I gasped. No. I'm not, he said. I went back to the vampire theory. On the drive back home, he asked me if I had any other theories. A few, I said. You know how they say the universe is ever expanding? Well, I think outer space is a hoax and NASA is a retirement home for CIA officers, I explained. The moon is real. I meant theories about me, said Edward. The way you look at me. Sometimes, okay, the way you look at my teeth sometimes and comment on how inhumanly pale or inhumanly cold I am, and the way you are putting your ear to my chest right now. I mean, what is going on inside that head of yours? You have absolutely no heartbeat. That's what I'm saying. Why do you say things like that? What could you possibly think that I am? He glanced over at me nervously. You don't think I'm a robot like the others, do you? Please, Belle. I just couldn't take that. Why don't I do the asking and you do the answering? I asked. To be honest, the robot theory was new to me. It would require further reflection. All right. Shoot. Is there a reason we shouldn't be together? He sighed. I was afraid you would ask that. The truth is, I'm not good for you, Belle. I'm dangerous. He started driving in a zigzag way. Too dangerous. I don't want to hurt you. He ran through a red light. I would never forgive myself if I put you in danger. He stopped at the yellow light so he could turn left during the red. Why don't I drive next time? I asked. That would solve it, he chuckled. I never did get my license. Now there's something I've been meaning to ask you, too. What's your favorite color? Blue. What's your favorite flower? Daisies. Cool. Well, I'm all out of questions for you. I think it's interesting that you have a favorite flower. That was my trick question. I lied about the color. I really don't care about colors. Blue has no value to me. He took his hand off the steering wheel to tuck the hair behind my ear further back behind my ear. That's what I mean about you. You're special. We both are. We both think about more things than the others. He parked the car and turned to me. You want to have a discussion? About those things? Sure, I said. I'd love to have a discussion about those things. We had a discussion. It was really interesting. I should probably go inside, I said when it was over. It's 9 p.m., and I've got to start making breakfast for my dad. Good night, he said and squeezed my hand. I leaned over to kiss him goodnight on the cheek. Suddenly, I was kissing thin air. He was gone. Don't ever try any funny business again, an angry voice rebuked, floating up from below the driver's seat. I'm sorry, Edward. We're not even going steady yet, the voice said. I need time to get acclimated to being near you. Time to practice handholding, for gosh sakes. His head popped up between the seat and the steering wheel. Belle, can we be totally honest with each other? Of course, Edward. We can't be in a relationship unless you're totally honest about the destruction you're capable of. Right. Well, what if I told you that I'm not capable of destruction? That I have to lift apple juice out of the fridge with no less than 2 hands, and that I would never be able to open a jar of anything for you? What if I told you that once there was a spider in my shower and I threw cup after cup of water at it until it slowly drowned, and I lived with the subsequent guilt complex for years before I became vegetarian? Vegetarian in vampire world means you drink every type of blood but human. Frankly, I think a more adequate analogy is kosher, and a better method would be for a vampire word committee, similar to l'Académie Française, to get together and come up with an original word for it. I'm not sure whom to contact about this, though. And I don't really have time to find out. I'm pretty busy with school and stuff. What if I told you, Edward continued hypothetically and not very relevantly, that you are the second girl who has ever held my hand, the first being my mom? And then confessed that TV yelling reactivates my hernia? Would you still want to go out with me? Well, Edward. Firstly, if those things were true, we wouldn't even be In the same car together, I pointed out. Secondly, I could never go out with a liar who lied about how he couldn't lift 10 gallons of apple juice. Frankly, I think your superhuman ability to hurl jugs of apple juice as big as cars is the most attractive thing about you. Please, Edward, I said, staring deeply into his soul and seeing that in his soul were many other awesome vampire secrets. I'm the one person you can trust forever. From here on out, let's be straight with one another. He looked as if he were about to cry, obviously from the joy of casting off the terrible burden of his secrets. Okay, he finally said. You got me. I am the biggest threat to your safety, and if we dated, I can't promise that I would be able to stop myself from. He faltered, too ashamed to utter all the terrible things he was capable of. From turning me into a deflated sack of skin? I whispered. You are strange, Belle, he said with the comfort of someone who knows you so well that he can tease you from time to time about your flaws, which, though inexcusable, are nonetheless adorable. You're beautiful. But shockingly, inconceivably strange. I knew it. I threw my arms around the air around him so he could acclimate himself to my delicious blood scent. It was grapefruit flavored. I'll come by to pick you up at 7 tomorrow morning for our first price elasticity meeting. And what dangerous activity is that a cover for? I asked as I got out. He stroked his hairless chin in silent contemplation. You'll see, he finally said. I scampered into the house, confused but excited. Did vampires have their own special way of conjuring dollar bills? Wouldn't that severely affect inflation? Wouldn't price changes have zero effect on Edward, since he has been saving money over hundreds of years? Then again, the economy these days. Hey, Belle, called my dad when he heard me come in. How was your night? I didn't answer. It would take too much explaining. He had no idea there were real vampires out there, and his concern for me was nothing more than a chemical reaction in his brain to ensure gene preservation. ASIMILAREREACTIONTOTHATOTHATMETOFINDVAMPIRESSODARN. CUTE. 6. Woods. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept worrying there was a leech outside my window. I kept worrying it was going to jump from the tree onto my window screen and then worm its way in, using its hemoglobin sensors to find where all my blood was. The problem with having great-smelling blood is that everyone is going to want some. I got up and closed the window. But that only caused a whole new slew of fears, because what if the leech were already in my room? What if he and Edward were in cahoots, and the leech was merely second banana to him, hiding under my bed until I fell asleep? One thing was for sure, I wasn't going to stop that leech from doing its job. That's no way to do my part for the economy. I opened the window wide and went back to bed. I tossed and turned for minutes. Luckily, my absent-minded mother had packed the tranquilizer gun I used to use on her when she'd get in one of her moods, so I shot myself with it and slept soundly. She also packed our VCR and her diamond ring. Despite the tranquilizer, I was still nervous the next morning. What was Edward going to do to me? Was I putting myself in grave danger? Why did a leech sucking my blood disgust me, but not a vampire? Most importantly, how was I going to balance wearing a ball gown with not looking like I cared too much about my appearance? I ended up scratching the ball gown and going with a button-down shirt, but a girl's button-down shirt. You can tell by the pockets. I heard a knock on the door and breathed in sharply. How thoughtful of Edward to knock when he could just as easily break down the door. I opened it expectantly. It was the mailman, grinning at me with that typical switchblade smile. Hi, he said. Nice weather. I shifted awkwardly. I felt comfortable talking about a lot of things. But not the weather. I didn't quite have the terminology down, having skipped the grade in which you learn about various atmospheric conditions. Yeah, the sun's on today, I guessed tentatively. Well, you tell your dad I said hello. It was then that I finally understood. He was in love with me. It was all there, the doorbell ringing, the door standing, the showing off with his weather knowledge. Were there no other girls in this town to diffuse the responsibility of being loved? I took the one letter he had for us. It was from the Switchblade Gas and Electric Company. I didn't know I had admirers there too, but I wasn't that surprised. I threw it in the trash with the IRS's love letters and closed the door without reply. I went into the kitchen to have some breakfast before Edward came. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and this was my most important day of the year. I would eat 2 breakfasts in recognition of this. Dad was in the kitchen, as usual, fumbling around with the drawers. He couldn't even pour himself cereal. I wonder how he managed to exist by himself before I arrived. "Here's a bowl, Dad," I said. "A what?" "It's like a plate, but with sides," I explained. As I pulled it out of the cupboard, I accidentally flung it towards the ceiling fan. I pulled out another bowl and gave it to my dad. He stared at it until I poured the cereal in. "Here, Dad. Here's the spoon. Eat your cereal with the spoon." "Thanks, Belle," he said appreciatively. He was pretty clueless, but at least he could feed himself, which was not true of my mother. I used to do the airplane thing to feed her, but then a plane crashed near our house, and so the sound scared her. After that, I would imitate flying cars, which is roughly the same sound, but on a lower register. "So, Belle, what's new today?" "Dad," I said, grasping his hands and looking directly into his eyes. "I'm in the deepest love that has ever occurred in the history of the world." "Gosh, Belle. When someone asks you, what's new, the correct answer is, not much. Besides, isn't it a little soon to cut yourself off from the rest of your peers, depending on a boyfriend to satisfy your social needs as opposed to making friends? Imagine what would happen if something forced that boy to leave. I'm imagining pages and pages would happen, with nothing but the names of the month on them. If Edward ever left, I'd find some other monster to hang out with. You know I don't like real people. I have no social skills," I said. "I guess I'm kind of like my dad in that way." I smiled generously. I wasn't usually this emotional with him, and it felt good. My mind shifted to my main concern. I needed him out of the house. Parents were so lame when boyfriends came over. I had lots of experience with this back in Phoenix, where my mom would leave the house whenever a boy came over, forcing me to find some way to entertain him when she was the one who had invited him in the first place. "Hey Dad," I said. "Why don't you go fishing?" "Yeah, I think I'm supposed to go fishing today." "Wasn't that today?" "I thought that was today." "I forget." "It was today," I said, military strategistly. "Why don't you try the farther fishing place? That way, you would get home later." "That sounds like a pretty good idea to me," he said. "Maybe I'll take that wheelchair friend along with me." "I like going fishing all day when you're home," he said as he walked out. "I'm not used to sharing a house with another person. It's exhausting." So that was that. Jim was out of the house, and he didn't mind that I was planning to see Edward. No one else could know we were going on a date, though. I needed to protect Edward in case anything happened. Still, I had never gone out with such a hot guy before, so I sent a vague email to the whole grade saying, "Edward Mullen and Belle Goose are totally together." All of a sudden, I heard a knock on the door. I peeped through the peephole, which is what my mom and I call the peephole because the word peep gives her the giggle fits. It was Edward. "Just a sec," I called, grabbing a few magazines and heading towards the bathroom. "I have to do some human things." The bathroom is where I keep the juicer. 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 I juiced some grapefruit onto my veins to get my characteristic, extra yummy blood scent. "Belle," he said when I finally opened the front door. Edward, I replied, demonstrating that I, too, had spent an hour in my room, memorizing his name. All of a sudden, he began to laugh. Had I said something funny? Had he? How long had I been spacing out for, slowly growing conscious that my fate was in the hands of a group of college kids who'd kill me off just for a laugh? Little did they realize that I was organizing a revolt. We're wearing the same clothes, he said. And it was true. He was also wearing a white button-down shirt, in fact, a woman's button-down. He, too, was wearing a hair clip that looked kind of girly. I laughed with him, then stopped when I saw he looked better than me, then laughed once more because all I wanted was for him to be happy. Let's go, Belle. There's something I want to show you. Where are we going? Someplace risky. Italy? I asked knowledgeably. Despite the fact that Italians are known for their tan skin and garlic-laden cuisine, I knew from my research that the most powerful vampire family had decided to live there forever. You'll see, he said mysteriously. Oh, and Belle? I think it would be wise for you to change into some sturdier shoes. I looked down at my feet. Sturdier than my flame-resistant space galoshes? I guess I had a pair of hiking boots. You never know what's lurking beyond acres and acres of grassy plateau. He added, dropping another cryptic hint. You're also going to need an oxygen tank, a tent, an afternoon's worth of rations and your own Sherpa. We're climbing Dead Man's Mound. I shuddered. Every part of my body told me not to go on this adventure, every part but my heart, which really needed the exercise. But Edward, I don't have any of those things. Neither do I, Belle. He took a step forward and I breathed in his musky, axe-drenched scent. Without oxygen, I'll not only be a danger to myself up there. I'll be a liability to you. He paused. I widened my eyes in fear, a good way to cover up an awkward silence that you're unsure how to fill. Do you see how risky this is? He continued. Me bringing you up there, without taking any safety precautions such as my anxiety medication? You, responsible for my actions for the rest of the afternoon? He swayed woozily. I nodded with resolve. My emotional well-being depends on you too much to be away from you. Thank God, he said. I wished you had told me that before I flushed my meds down the toilet, though. I really wished you had told me that. Before. He tossed me a tiny hammock. If at any point while we are hiking, I crawl into the vegetation or other nookish space, just sling that around your shoulder and cradle me for a while. I put it in my purse and unlocked my truck. I stepped up to open the door and immediately fell down. So Belle. You seem exhausted, Edward said as we got in the car. Yeah, I couldn't sleep that well last night. Neither could I, he said as we sped off. Yeah, those night leeches are becoming a major concern, aren't they? Oh, Belle, he laughed softly, when you talk like that, I become afraid, and if you continue to do so, I will feel compelled to tell the authorities. His laugh was like the jingle of 1,000 manly sirens. I pulled into the parking lot at the end of our block. Here we are, I announced. The Dead Man Trailhead. I jumped out of the car, inflated my core stability ball, and started my stretches. Will your dad be okay if we hike off the trail? Edward asked. On this road? What Jim doesn't know can't hurt him. I flopped my stomach onto the ball and did the stretch where you let it go wherever it wants. You didn't inform your dad where you would be? Geez, Belle. I don't know how much of this risk-taking I can take. He started wheezing and his nose gushed with blood. Great. And now this, he said in the nasal voice of Alvin the Chipmunk, holding his nose. I brought him over to the ball and propped his head against it. What if you didn't come home before dinner time? He continued to chastise. What if Jim didn't make an extra plate of dinner for you because he thought you already ate? Then where would you be? He knows I'm with you. Fat lot of use that'll be when we're marooned on the road. forever. It's a good thing my parents inserted a chip in my arm that tells them where I am and lists the possible ways I could go missing. I'm sorry, I said, but I wasn't really. When guys gnash their teeth and knit their brows in a broody, furious expression, it means they have found their soulmate. Plus, his anger had set off his overactive sweat glands, causing him to tear off his shirt. As he stood up to march down the road, squatting here and there to examine the terrain, the musculature of his arms wobbled like string cheese. In the sky was a single cloud, thin and disc-like, precisely covering the sun. I looked over at Edward. It occurred to me that I had never seen him in direct sunlight. Interestingly enough, I had also never seen him sparkle. Could the two be related? I had a theory that sunlight drastically alters a vampire's appearance, much like green lighting makes them appear sickly. Ready when you are, I called, peeling off a layer in the hot, but significantly not bright, heat. Edward turned and I screamed. Yet again, he was wearing the same top as me, a white, skinny-strapped camisole. How hadn't I noticed that until he turned around? Sometimes, the cape my imagination constantly projects onto his back distorts how I perceive reality. Still, Edward had made some improvements. He had cut the shirt down the middle and applied a zipper, which he now zipped down to his belly button. His bared flesh gleamed translucent, revealing the blue veins beneath his two-haired chest. The shirt fit perfectly to his concave belly, outlining every protruding rib bone and leaving nothing to the imagination. His neck radiated like a god from all the rhinestones he had glued to the top's neckline. I looked down at my plain, zipperless camisole. I was beginning to weary of Edward's competitive method of wooing. We'll see who wins the potato sack race, I thought maliciously. I had been practicing for years. Let's go, he said. We began to hike up the road on Deadman's Mound. The road circled and circled around the sloping woods, past and repassed the straight, sloping trail. In the woods we saw some beetles and worms. I mention this because now that mammals have fled what little nature grows near civilization, we have to get excited about the small things. Edward kept on referring to his map so we wouldn't get lost. When we did get lost, he had the clarity of mind to pull out his tent so we could set up camp for the night. Then I took out my binoculars and spotted the top of the hill, 20 yards to our left. We trekked onwards until the road came to an abrupt stop in the middle of a field. A car rambled up, stopped, and made a 12-point turn. I skipped to the middle of the field and continued skipping around and around. Never had I felt freer. Never had I belted the sound of music louder. It was beautiful. There were glorious weeds everywhere, and those yellow flowers that when you blow on them disappear into white flakes. It was magical. And yet, it looked strangely familiar. Is this my backyard? I asked. Edward stood, leaning against a tree in the woods bordering the meadow. No, Belle. We're at least 5 minutes from your house. Oh, I replied. I was so bad at approximation. It was a foreign situation, but it all felt oddly familiar, so familiar that I guesstimated that millions of girls around the world could identify with it. Suddenly shy, I peered over at Edward, who was lurking in the shade, watching me prostrate in obeisance to the 8 wind spirits. Isn't there something you wanted to show me? I reminded him. Something about price elasticity? I asked, his gorgeous sunlight transformation. Oh. Right. Close your eyes and count to 100. I closed my eyes and counted extra slowly, in Mississippi's. Then I got distracted and started thinking about Mississippi. Were there vampires in Mississippi? Was there rain? For a brief second, I forgot what number came after 79. After I had counted to 110 times, starting over again every time Edward shrieked, "Not ready yet," I opened my eyes and shielded them against the sun, now significantly exposed in the clear sky. What I saw bewildered me. Edward was standing in the middle of the field, glistening. His skin had transformed into a shade of fire engine red, and the sweat dripping from his every pore intensified the illusion that his head was a shiny tomato. In his hand was a shovel and at his feet was a hole. This is what I want to show you, he said. I'm already familiar with beetles, I said, expertly popping one into my mouth. Listen, Belle. This is a secret that I can only entrust to you. He stooped down into the hole and wrestled out a man-sized android. Are you scared yet? No. It's beautiful. I took a step forwards to touch its arm. Edward stiffened. Sorry, he said. I wasn't prepared for your movement. When you're around androids all day, you get used to controlling when and how people move. This whole human interaction thing, well, it's going to take some getting used to. That's all right. So I was the only human Edward had contact with. I stepped towards it more slowly, trying to do humanity justice. What is it, exactly? It's a solar-powered, anatomically correct android. I keep it in this bright, secluded meadow so it can charge openly without fearing that rivals in the annual robotics competition will kidnap it. After I turn it off, I bury it out of respect. What does it do? Allow me to demonstrate. He turned it on and the robot's eyes glowed red. It stood up slowly, each joint clicking into place. When it reached its full height, its head spun towards me. Then it collapsed back on the floor like a punctured soufflé before slowly beginning to rise again. That's it? It just falls over and gets back up over and over? Yep, look at it struggle. Look how many synthetic muscles it has to use. The human body is an extraordinary thing. He took my hand. Feel how smooth I've made its skin. As he pulled my hand, I leaned in, mesmerized by Edward's face. My lips drew closer to his heavily braced mouth. Edward was rolling away on the ground, arms outstretched like a rolling pin. My fast actions had caught him off guard again. It's my fault, he yelped, still rolling. I can't kiss you until we're officially going out. It's part of the rules. He stopped rolling and sat up, his breath rattling in his chest as he heaved. Isabel. ISA. Izzy. Belly Bell. Will you go out with me? I don't mean physically go out, we can stay inside and work on a website that promotes this robot all you want. I mean, hypothetically. Like, if you were to go outside with someone, to a place, that person would be me. And that place would be an arcade. I looked into his eyes and saw the one thing he couldn't say. Every moment I look at you, it takes all the discipline I can muster not to take you in my arms and drink from the fount of your throat. I'm not afraid of you, ISA Edward, I said, speaking his full name as softly as he had said mine. Still? You're still not afraid of me? I assure you, I am an incredibly scary guy. He stood there for a minute, thinking, then jogged across the field. As if you could outrun me, he shouted. As if you could outfight me. He punched the air. As if you could outclimb me. He hugged a tree and tried to wrap his legs around it before tumbling to the ground and trotting back to me, placing his hands on his head to maximize the inflow of oxygen. Now are you afraid? Now will you go out with me? That took me by surprise. Asking permission was something only knights from ancient centuries did. Then I remembered how old Edward really was, that hundreds of years ago, he was living among Napoleon and Jesus. Yes, Edward. Yes. I was so attracted to him I could have peed myself right there on the spot, but I hadn't done anything like that in a while. I was older now, and harnessed my feelings in moments like these by opening and closing my fists very rapidly. Great, he said, and then stared at me. I stared at him. I lay down on the grass. He lay down next to me. We made grass angels in synchronized motions. The time flew by as if in a dream.